Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Monday President's Day edition of the OBX Wave Report here on February the 20th. And we are right now reporting from our remote location, but we will be heading back to the Outer Banks tonight. And my reports from the Outer Banks and live observations will continue at that point. I do want to talk a little bit about President's Day, and in particular, one of our presidents who has just now entered hospice. And I want to talk about his contributions to U.S. energy independence and global climate action. But before I get into that, I'd just like to show you guys a basic picture of the wave models for the Outer Banks, where we are experiencing larger swells coming onshore from the south for the south-facing beaches, so such as Frisco, Billy Mitchell, and Buxton, and on into Ocracoke. And with that southerly swell, the waves are not really lining up as much for the northerly beaches. So the northerly beaches are getting 0 to 2 foot waves, while the south beaches are getting 2 to 4 foot waves. But getting into President's Day, I did want to talk a little bit about Jimmy Carter. And the reason why I wanted to talk about Jimmy Carter is, well, number one, our hearts go out to him as he enters hospice. And at least for me in particular, I remember his numerous contributions and his great compassion for the people of the United States and for all people around the world. And in particular, I remember Jimmy Carter as and admire his action on the humanitarian side as well as the climate and clean energy action side. And back in the 1970s, the United States was experiencing a period of inflation that was much worse than what we recently experienced following COVID. And this inflation was bad and worse because it included both inflation and economic stagnation. So there was no economic growth really to moderate the impacts of inflation, unlike what we have now, where we're experiencing economic growth and inflation at the same time. So, but the economic growth in the form of jobs growth is helping to cushion the blow of the inflation. And what's interesting to me is that things that Jimmy Carter helped to put in place decades ago, and in all honesty, things that if we had pursued them more vigorously over the decades, we would have been better off. But things that Jimmy Carter helped to put in place decades ago are basically helping us now. And one of the things is the green energy incentives, the clean energy incentives that Carter put into place to incentivize things like wind and solar and hydroelectric, and that later helped to form the food chain of clean energy for electrification through use of batteries for vehicles and things like that. And back in the 1970s, Carter envisioned a time when the United States would be energy independent. And part of that process of becoming energy independent would be having 20% of the US energy picture, of the US energy production be from clean energy sources like wind, water, and solar. What's interesting is that today the United States is mostly energy independent. And a strong basis for that is the fact that right now the United States generates 22% of its electricity from renewable sources. And that is expected to rise to 24% in 2023. This is more energy now being produced by renewable sources than by coal. And over this next decade, we're on track to overcome even natural gas production with clean energy if we follow the present path. This is helping the United States to maintain strong jobs and a strong economic posture despite inflation following COVID. And so when we talk about Carter, I think about this, and Carter was not necessarily, I think he was a little reticent about moving into clean energy because he knew the political forces that he would face as he did that. And nonetheless, he did it. He did the right thing, and he was ridiculed for doing the right thing. And to me, this shows a a rare form of courage and leadership and vision. One of many people have said this to me about Carter is that Carter um, was a man ahead of his time, but that history would judge him well. And I think that that is the case. That this and in even now, Carter's actions that were ridiculed at the time, especially when it comes to energy, are being vindicated. And as we at the OBX Wave Report are here promoting clean energy as a response to climate change and to defend the coastlines from rising sea levels and more intense storms, it's important, in my opinion, on President's Day to recognize the contributions of the Carter administration in providing us with the means to fight climate crisis now. And I just want to pull this one quote. This is from Yale Climate Connections from an article in 2008. And back in the 1970s, Carter said, America was to harness the power of the sun to enrich our lives as we move away from crippling dependence on foreign oil. And little did many of us know back in the 70s, despite the fact that much of the science had already been established when it comes to climate change. But little did many of us know that we were also going to face a rising climate crisis in the early 20th century. And I'm just going to go ahead and pull up this quote from Twitter, Mom's Clean Air Force. Kudos to you guys there. Um, this quote from Ryan Grimm with a picture of Carter standing in front of the solar panels at the White House. And the statement is, I keep thinking about how Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House roof. We knew what was coming 50 years ago, or at least the Carter administration did, and many of the scientists and researchers did, even if the public was not yet awakened or woke to the facts of climate change. Woke in this case, and in all cases, being a good thing, although the term woke basically means being aware of injustice in society and is typically related to hate, racism and hate. So woke is a positive thing. The right is trying to demonize woke, but being awake to things is to be aware, to be enlightened. It's not something that we should demonize. It's something that we should celebrate. And Jimmy Carter helped to wake us up and helped to put us on a path to where we are now, where we are capable of mass deploying clean energy. So kudos to Jimmy Carter. Our hearts go out to him on President's Day as he enters hospice. And in his life of great achievements, visionary achievements, and in his ongoing, never-ending compassion and efforts to make the human world a better place. Um, so yeah, much love and praise to Jimmy Carter in his hour of darkness on President's Day. All right, so let's get into the wave report. And right now we are looking at the satellite picture for the lower 48. We have a stationary front that is draped across the Mid-Atlantic Trail, and it trails down through the Mississippi River Valley, Tennessee, Mississippi River Valley, near Arkansas, Alabama, and runs on down south into Texas, and then trails on into Mexico. The stationary front is tapping moisture from the Pacific, from the Atlantic, and from the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic particularly being much warmer than normal, showing their signature heat and impact of climate change driven by fossil fuel burning. And then we have some weather systems heading across the US Northeast and weather systems coming in from the Pacific, from the Northwest, and moving toward the Southeast as they blanket the coastlines and parts of the Rockies in precipitation. Out here out west, we've got a big old high pressure system that's squeezing moisture out on its borders, and we can see that both in the stream of moisture coming in through the Pacific Northwest and the stream of moisture coming in across Baja, Mexico, and heading into the US. Looking at the infrared satellite shot, we can see also the stationary front and the flow of moisture is very discernible flow of moisture coming in from the Pacific. Again, we have the big high pressure here squeezing moisture out on its boundaries. I'm going to show you a model of the high in just a moment here, and then you can see the moisture coming in from the Pacific Northwest. We've got ingredients for severe weather here, and what's interesting is that the models are picking up some bomb type cyclones in early March, and this is starting to become consistent. If we keep seeing this in the long range and moving into the mid range and short range models, it becomes more and more likely that we're actually going to see these severe weather events that the long range models are picking up. But nonetheless, at least right now, from the long range perspective, there's a risk, and it appears to be steady and potentially growing, of powerful storms forming in the central US and then tracking on off toward the north and east toward the Great Lakes and affecting large swaths of the eastern US, say drawing a line from the Mississippi on eastward, maybe even from like Texas on eastward. 960-ish millibar storms in these models. This is equivalent to the bomb cyclone that we saw back in December. So if these systems do develop, they will be major weather events. And right now, the ingredients in play are warmer than normal waters over the Gulf of Mexico, which help to fuel severe weather for parts of the central US. Warmer than normal waters over the North Atlantic, which also provide extra fuel for severe systems. And then we've got this moisture tap coming in from the Pacific as well. So, and then a dip in the jet stream out west, providing a trough for storm formation and instability for storm formation. So all these ingredients starting to point toward potentially severe weather in late February and early March. We do see these big old high pressure systems right now squeezing moisture out along their boundaries. And these big burly highs are really pumping moisture out to the edge out here in the North Atlantic. And then we got another big burly high that I was talking about out here over the Pacific, squeezing quite a lot of moisture out along its edge. We've got that one moisture tap running in through the stationary front, and then it's dredging moisture up from the tropics and hurling it into a kind of stream of moisture as storms ride down the top face and the front side of this high pressure system, tapping into that moisture as they flow into the Pacific Northwest. Looking at the weather picture, the radar picture for the US, we've got some rain associated with that stationary front. Some areas of the stationary front not producing rain, but we've got rain into parts of West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, parts of Virginia, and little trailers of rain running down into New Mexico, parts of Mexico, possibly little spots of showers running in through Texas and parts of the Mississippi River Valley. We've got quite a lot in the way of weather alerts out west here, with heavy snows hitting the mountain regions and heavy rainfalls near the Seattle region. The storminess for the West Coast is about to amp up according to the forecast. So California is again under the gun for more severe weather, particularly Southern California, which is interesting, something that we need to watch. And we've also got some disturbed weather running across parts of the Great Lakes and into the Northeast here. Looking at the offshore waters, we've had a pretty consistent gale warning for waters off the U.S. East Coast. Unfortunately for us surfers, it's not really kicking too much in the way of swells back toward us. Most of the winds are coming in from the south and southwest. Although with the Outer Banks here, we've got a very broad stretch of coastline and we have numerous south-facing beaches. So for the south-facing beaches, the wave conditions are going to be better for the coming week than for the north-facing beaches. All right, so looking at where the storms are expected to form over the next week, we do have a tendency for nor'easter type storms to form out here over the North Atlantic just off the U.S. East Coast. We have a tendency for more severe weather for Tennessee and Kentucky, and we have a tendency for severe weather for the U.S. West Coast, particularly for the mountain regions and areas right along the coast, running from Southern California to Central California, getting a little break as we head into Northern California and North Central California. And then as we get back into the extreme Northern California and up through Seattle and British Columbia, the precipitation potential does jump up. This is a 7-day forecast. And in this 7-day forecast, we do have some hot spots in the range of possibly 7 to 10 inches, particularly along the coast in parts and along some of the ridge lines and mountain regions, as well as parts of the southwestern portion of California. All right, so let's get down to local conditions for the Outer Banks as I talk about some of the beaches. And we did say earlier that the northern beaches are getting smaller waves as we have like a swell coming up from the south that isn't really translating to shore for the northern beaches. So right now at Jeanette's Pier, we've got waves in the range of 1 foot, so very small waves at Jeanette's Pier right now in the range of 1 foot. Primary swell coming in at 6 seconds, secondary swell coming in at 9 seconds. And the winds are out of the southwest at 14 miles per hour, which is offshore. With those small waves, we're getting also cool temperatures in the range of 51 degrees Fahrenheit, with ocean water temperatures around 50. And weather conditions right now are partly cloudy with an expected high today of 62. It's worth noting that the temperature forecasts are actually about on track. Actually, it looks like the forecast might be overshooting the projected temperature just a little bit here at Jeanette's Pier. Heading on south down to Rodanthe, we do find slightly better waves at Rodanthe. We're getting waves right now in the range of 1 to 2 feet there as we head on about 20 miles down to the south. Primary swell also coming in at 6 seconds with a secondary swell at 9. Winds are out of the west, so due offshore here at Rodanthe with 16 mile per hour west winds, pretty fresh offshore breeze, likely hollowing out some of those small waves. So we might have some nice little barrels there down at Rodanthe. Air temperatures right now at Rodanthe 58 degrees, so considerably warmer than at Jeanette's Pier. And then ocean water temperatures 53 degrees, a little bit warmer. We do have a little bit of warm up in the ocean waters. And right now in February, late February into early March, this is the coldest time of the year for water temperatures. So water temperatures should start to gradually warm up over the next few weeks. And we might be at the beginning of the warm up phase, or we might be just before it. But in any case, we're at about the coldest water temperature time of the year right now for the Outer Banks. Weather conditions are partly cloudy with an expected high of about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And so, yeah, in all locations, you're going to need your full suits, your hood, your booties, likely, unless you're some kind of polar bear and you like the cold water. All right, so getting down to Buxton. We do have better waves down here at Buxton, and this is the case with most of the beaches on the south. Buxton's nice because it's at that point, and the waves can wrap around very easily. The wave energy translates very nicely. It's typically the largest wave spot for the Outer Banks, or one of the largest wave spots. Today, it's not the largest wave spot, but it's close. And right now, waves are in the range of 2 to 3 feet down there at Buxton with a primary swell coming in at 9 seconds. Secondary swell coming in at 6 seconds. The swell is predominantly coming in from the south, and that's just the case with the entire Outer Banks. Winds are also from the west at 16 miles per hour, which is offshore for the east-facing beaches down there at Buxton. Air temperature is 59 degrees. Ocean water temperature much warmer. It's warmed up a bit, about by about 1 degree over the past day or so. So 60-degree water temperature down there at Buxton. That makes me happy to see that. I don't know. I mean, it's not warm, but it's warmer. Weather conditions are partly cloudy with an expected high today of 63 degrees Fahrenheit. And I did get a fourth observation for you guys today over at Billy Mitchell, where the waves are 2 to 4 feet. And we've got that south swell coming in pretty directly on to the coast there. And that's where the waves are forming up better with these south facing beaches. You've also got some decent waves down here at Frisco, although a little bit smaller, and then good waves down at Ocracoke. But I'm just focusing in on Billy Mitchell right now with its 2 to 4 foot waves. Primary swell coming in at 6 seconds, secondary swell coming in at 9 seconds. And winds are out of the southwest, so coming in like so, which is onshore at 17 miles per hour, so fresh onshore breeze there. Air temperature is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Expected high today of 63, and the ocean water temperature is also at 60 degrees there at Billy Mitchell. So that does round up our local observations for the Outer Banks. So now let's get into weather, and I'm a little concerned. We've got the models are coughing up these really big bad storms for parts of the central U.S. that could impact the east, much of the east, and much of the areas from the Gulf Coast to the Great Lakes and possible parts of Texas on eastward for early March. And so let's talk about the ingredients of these potential severe weather systems. We've got a dipole, so which means that we've got predicted warmer than normal temperatures for the US Southeast and predicted colder than normal temperatures for the US West. This horizontal distribution where you've got a pool of cold air and a pool of hot air right next to each other can set up a dividing line and a boundary where severe weather tends to occur, particularly if moisture is involved. And we did talk about the moisture when it comes to the warmer than normal Gulf of Mexico, the warmer than normal Atlantic, and then the moisture tap coming in from the Pacific. The warmer than normal Gulf and the Atlantic having climate crisis fingerprints, so providing extra fuel for storms, loading the dice for more powerful storms. In I'm looking at 8 to 14 day outlooks for temperature and precipitation. Now, in the 8 to 14 day, we don't have the fingerprint yet of extreme severe weather, except for maybe parts of the US West Coast. But when I look at the long range models, we do have those bomb cyclones type events forming for the central US. So, but there is an indicator for above normal precipitation for the Great Lakes region and the northern tier of the central US. So we got the dipole though in the long range forecast. Now, this jet stream setup is one of the features of the potential for severe weather running into early March, and it does appear that this jet stream setup will tend to be fixed with a strong high pressure in the south and east, helping to pull moisture up from the Gulf and from the Pacific, and helping to provide that warm, wet, unstable air mass. A warm, wet air mass, and then the trough in the west providing the instability and the storms coming in to feed off that moisture that is expected to be in place due to that high dredging up that water vapor from those much warmer than normal sea surfaces down there in the Gulf. Actually, you know what? I want to look at the Gulf right now. Let's look at the ocean, because I'm curious. I want to see what the sea surface temperature anomalies are down there in the Gulf. Okay, so let's look at the Gulf. We've got, let's go to Fahrenheit. Looks like, yeah, it's just been continuous. 2 to 5 degree temperatures above normal, 2 to 5 degree above normal sea surface temperatures for the Gulf of Mexico. So that's creating a situation where there's this big plug of moisture here over the Gulf of Mexico, a much more consistent and forceful potential lift, convection in the atmosphere to add fuel to those storms when they do fire. All right, so now in the near term, the convective potentials aren't too crazy. So for the next 3 days, we've got some potential for thunderstorms in the central US running in from Texas to the Great Lakes and kind of a diagonal running from south west to northeast, but nothing too crazy, no like major indicators for supercells or tornadoes, although that doesn't mean those events won't happen, but not yet showing up in the mesoscale models. Now let's get down to the global forecast system forecast, and this is the thing. So yesterday we had an indicator. We're still in grain of salt territory, but there's something in this model that's got me a little bit more wound up than I would typically be. And so let's just go ahead and advance this model. So we've got I'm gonna have to go back to the previous model because this is the new model. So let's go back to the previous model. The new model hasn't fully loaded yet. So let's look at the conditions now. We've got the stationary front across much of the southern US, running from the mid-Atlantic on south across Texas and down into the Pacific. We've got the moisture flow coming in off the Pacific from the northwest, hitting the Pacific Northwest and the Rockies, and we've got a low over the Great Lakes. And so the weather systems march across, low in the Great Lakes moves east, taps into some energy from the frontal system, and the moisture flow across the Pacific Northwest continues and helps to develop a storm over the Rockies, which then gets pretty intense by the middle of the week, Wednesday into Thursday. So we do have a pretty powerful storm system on tap for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday for the central US, running from Texas to the Great Lakes. And also consistent stormy weather for the US West Coast, with an upper level low riding down the front side of that high and bringing moisture and precipitation down into California as we get into the day on Saturday. And here in the Outer Banks, we're getting this persistent southerly flow and larger waves south, smaller waves north throughout most of the week. And then we get the low pressure system moves offshore and shifts the winds around to the north on Friday and Saturday. So it looks like the northern facing beaches might get some good waves on Friday and Saturday. We'll check that out as we watch the weeks progress. Now I'm going to rapidly move through the models, and we do see some strong storms firing off for the central US, but once we get into March, early March, we see this thing. And so we get a 984 millibar low forming for Oklahoma and Kansas here. And then as this storm moves over the Mississippi, it starts to bomb out to a 975 and then a 965 millibar system as it gets toward the Great Lakes. That is an extraordinarily strong storm system with far-reaching effects ranging all the way down to from the Gulf Coast and into Canada. So major bomb type storm coming in early March. Now this was yesterday. This is one of the reasons why I had my March Madness kind of theme for the wave report yesterday. Now let's look at the next storm. So we've got another storm that forms over the Rockies, kind of meanders for a while, and then starts to move east. And we get that big moisture tap, boom, just like you can see it flooding in from the Gulf, and the instability coming in from the north and the colder air moving over the Rockies. And then the storm really starts to get together on March 7th as looks like a 990 millibar system. And then as it moves over the Mississippi River Valley, again bombs out into looks like the 980s, 970s, and then as it gets up into Canada, a 969 millibar system with this just massive front tapping all the way down from the Gulf and moving and just basically hurling severe weather across the Great Lakes and on up into Canada. So not just one bomb cyclone in the long range forecast, but two. And so the models are now really starting to say, hey, maybe there's just a general tendency for storminess in early March. Again, we're still in grain of salt territory because these are long range forecasts, but we'll just have to keep a weather eye for that. The ingredients are in place. They've been in place for a little while, and you just need that instability and these large synoptic features to really tap that energy. And with the jet stream doing that big dip out west, and having that big trough and that dipole between hot and cold, and the storm track that kind of forms between the two, you can start to tap that energy, and that's what the longer range models seem to be starting to pick up. So we'll see. All right, so looking at the waves right now, we did go through a little bit of a wave picture, and right now we've got about a 4 foot swell south of Buxton coming in from the south. Southerly swell is expected to continue through tomorrow and build up to 5 feet. This might translate very well to the south-facing beaches. And then on into Wednesday, the south-facing swell becomes smaller and confused as we get a little bit of a northern impulse here. Waves are likely to be rather small here on Wednesday for many parts of the Outer Banks. And then as we get on into Thursday, we get more of a southerly wind flow again with taller swells coming in from the south in the range of about 6 feet. So yeah, it's like Monday through Thursday, just a southern beaches event as far as waves go, with smaller waves to the north. And then as we get on into Friday, again, a confused swell as we start to get more of a northerly wind influence. And I'm just going to inch this forward as we get later into the day on Friday, and those northerly winds start to come in. We start to get a large swell coming in from the north in the range of about 7 feet. So if you want to see waves for the northern beaches, you're going to have to wait until the weekend as we get a bit of a nor'easter out here off the US East Coast that pulls in a strong wind field and a relatively tall swell field to the Outer Banks beaches. All right, so thank you for joining me for this President's Day version of the OBX Wave Report. I ask you to spare some thoughts, some good thoughts for Jimmy Carter as he enters hospice, and to reflect on his vision and his brave willingness to face adversity for the betterment of all of us. And we will be chatting with you shortly, but as we conclude, I'd also like to ask you to take Jimmy Carter's example and do everything you can to help speed the transition to clean energy. Clean energy being wind, water, solar, and electric vehicles. And in doing so, to help defend our beautiful coastlines from the impacts of climate change driven by fossil fuel burning, those impacts being sea level rise and more powerful storms driven by the extra heat that is injected by fossil fuel burning into the climate system. So thank you for joining me, and